Zags got dudes. What transfer wing Jalen Warley brings to Mark Few's club in the 2025-26 season.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Tuesday. Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Game Time. Folks, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you will get $20 off your first purchase. Well, thrilled to be joined for today's show by Connor Hope of the Heat Check college basketball site and the Heat Check Hangout podcast, here to discuss the teams in the battle for Atlantis. We're going to make some predictions, how we think both sides of that bracket are going to shake out, what it means for Gonzaga, the potential matchups, the for sure matchup against West Virginia, as well as the potential matchups against Indiana, Louisville, and Arizona, or perhaps somebody else from the other side of that bracket. We're going to get to all of that, but we have to lead today's show with the big news. Did not expect that we would be talking about the 25-26 Gonzaga basketball season in November in the midst of a very good season for Gonzaga, but that is the nature of the beast here. Jaylen Warley, a transfer from Virginia, who never played for Virginia, but spent the last 3 years of his college basketball career at Florida State. He entered the transfer portal after Tony Bennett's departure from Virginia. He visited Gonzaga last week or 2 weeks ago, visited Iowa State, and we found out on Monday morning he is committing to Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs. He will redshirt this year and play in the 25-26 season for his final year of eligibility. Quick information about Warley for those who don't know: he averaged about 7.5 points per game last year as a junior for Florida State. He's a 6'7", rangy wing, very good defensively, not much of a scorer, certainly not much of an outside shooter, has not developed that aspect of his game. But there's a lot to really like about what he could bring to a Mark Few system. Connor, what was your reaction to finding out Warley? First of all, that there was interest between Gonzaga and Warley, which kind of surprised me. And then now that he's going to be in Spokane next year.
I don't know if I was necessarily surprised that there was interest. I think what we've seen over the last 2 years, which were two, I guess you could call them relatively down years for Gonzaga, was a lack of defense.
Yeah.
Gonzaga, from the 2017 season through the Chet Holmgren season, generally had fantastic defenses.
Yeah.
And I think Mark Few's offense is somewhat player resistant in that you can put some of these wings into this continuity offense, and they might not, be putting up 17 points in games, but they'll give you enough that if you have a Braden Smith, if you have a Braden Huff, if you have a Dusty Stromer, there's going to be enough scoring. And so you really need to hone in on the defense. That's what I think you have with like Ismaila Diane and Emmanuel Innocenti and Warley, is that he provides you with defense. My concern is that there's a little bit of overlap between him and Innocenti and exactly what you need from them. Both are kind of long wings that can play well defensively, not necessarily the best offensive pieces, although I think Innocenti might be a little bit more proven as a scoring option. The difference is I think Warley's actually a pretty good playmaker.
Yeah.
He can attack the rim, make plays for others, is long, so you kind of have to account for that. He can play the two at 6'7". Granted, that was in Florida State's offense, which Florida State always starts like 4, 6, 7 guys.
Yeah.
But I think from that perspective, it's more likely to be a battle between him and Innocenti to be the 3. And then the other one comes off the bench, or the 2 with Dusty Stromer at the 3, and the other one comes off the bench, because they are kind of just defensive specialists in their own right. But that's a good problem to have for Mark Few. Like it seems like his recruiting, even with Battle and Ajayi for this year, has been, I want long athletic players that I think I can put into good positions defensively that will help elevate not only the defensive end, but also generate turnovers and help with the offensive end and be quick and maybe potentially be rim runners and stuff like that. So I like the addition, because even if Warley is the 6th or 7th guy in that rotation, what he provides defensively is going to be very valuable, and anything he gives you offensively is probably just a bonus at that point.
Yeah, and I think that's where I think fans who are concerned, like, oh, looking at his 3-point shooting and the fact that he's basically doesn't take threes when he doesn't make them, and feeling concerned, it's like that's not what Gonzaga is going to ask him to do. He's not coming here to be, to replace Caleb Battle. Like, that's not the role that they're envisioning for him. I do think that there does appear on paper to be a little bit of overlap with Innocenti, like you mentioned. That was actually going to be one of my next kind of talking points, because they are both guys who aren't super proven as scorers, certainly not proven as shooters. I know Mark Few has talked up in Innocenti's ability to shoot the three, and we've seen him take a lot of threes, and he did, in the craziness scrimmage. And I think there is more potential for him to be more of a scorer long-term than Warley, but they're both on this team to play good defense on the wing. They're both facilitators of sorts. I think you're right. Warley is more proven in that area, and I think just better in that area than Innocenti is, but he was a guy who could kind of have that connecting role a bit at Tarleton State. So that would be my only, I guess, concern, is it just seems like those two players are very similar, but like you said, they're not necessarily both going to be on the floor at the same time very often. I think one starts, one comes off the bench. We'll see if Innocenti gets a kind of a boost because he's been in the system for a little longer. Dusty Stromer is more of an offensive player than both of them. He's obviously also somebody who has been lauded for his defensive presence, but I think is going to take on a bigger scoring role. I mean, we've already seen that this year, and certainly next year, I think that'll be more what is asked for him as a shooter, as a scorer. But I think the main point, and you touched on it at the end, Mark Few wants more size. He wants more length. He wants more of that kind of switchability, versatility defensively. And I think you look at this backcourt that Gonzaga's had. I mean, USC, I know it was an exhibition game, and we don't want to take that result too seriously, but teams with big guards could potentially exploit this Gonzaga team. We saw Desmond Claude just go to work in the second half of that exhibition game because Gonzaga doesn't have a ton of rim protection. And if you can post up the smaller guards, that can be an issue. And I wonder if this is almost like a kind of a way to try to mitigate that in the future. Braden Smith's not very big, but Stromer, Innocenti, Warley, Davis Fogel, the freshman coming in. If Steele Venters is healthy, we'll see. All those guys are 6'5" or taller. So it feels like there's kind of this push to have a little bit more length and size on the perimeter because it's been part of the defensive issues for this team in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and I think you look at the shooting numbers, you look at all of that, and you might get concerned. If I were to word it as his floor is Jeremy Jones, like and that's the kind of expectation that I have is, at worst, he's a Jeremy Jones type player. Right. At best, he can get up to be maybe like maybe not quite to an Eric McClellan spot, but like one of those really good kind of secondary guards that plays good defense. Like that should make you more confident in what he can provide. Yeah, looking at the numbers, you're going to be like, oh, he only shoots 40 some odd % from 2, and he doesn't shoot threes, and like he made 1 of 7, I think, last year for Florida State. But if I said, oh, this guy could be like a Jeremy Jones, like a 7th or 8th guy who makes plays defensively, he's good enough as a scoring guard that you have to respect him, get steals, can dish the ball out, like that type of player, you'll take that as a 7th or 8th guy in this Gonzaga offense.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly what it is. He's going to play a specialized role that I think Gonzaga is eyeballing and wants more of on this roster. And I think he fits that bill. And I think you mentioned it earlier too, and I'll just throw it out there again. The systems that he's been in are very different from Gonzaga's, and that's what made me interested. I'm not as surprised that Gonzaga was interested. I was a little surprised, like he looked at Iowa State, which is a little bit more similar, and Virginia obviously plays a very slow pace, which is where he initially plans to play. So I'm curious what he looks like in a more open offense, a more high-scoring offense. I think, I don't think he's going to magically be a 40% or even 35% three-point shooter, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see him kind of tick up as an offensive player, just in a system that's a lot of players tend to tick up in when they're here.
Yeah, I guess I mentioned McClellan. I maybe a better comp is like a poor man's Anton Watson.
Yeah, Yeah, either way, I kind of see what you're saying with that comp, though. Yeah. All right, let's talk Battle for Atlantis. We got one game for sure that we know, Wednesday morning, 11:30 a.m. Pacific time, Gonzaga taking on West Virginia. We're going to preview that matchup. We're going to look at Indiana, Louisville, who are taking each other on in the morning before that game, who we think Gonzaga might be matching up with in that second round game. All that coming up in just a second. But first, folks, going to live events, it's the absolute best, whether it's concerts, comedy shows, musical theater, and more. And finally, now college sports are back. Football season is nearing the end. College basketball is in full swing, and I'm looking forward to making a bunch of new memories this college season. And great news, when you're getting tickets for this year, Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so that you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. And right now, tickets for Gonzaga versus Kentucky, Battle in Seattle, Climate Pledge Arena, they're still on sale. There's still plenty of them available. And you can get 2 tickets in the upper deck for just $62 a piece to see 2 top 10 teams in the country. So folks, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, still Locked On Zags podcast, still Andy Patton, still joined by Connor Hope of Heat Check College Basketball. Connor, want to talk about the Battle for Atlantis. That was the original plan for today's show. Of course, the Jalen Warley news. I wanted to get that out as well. But we got a matchup against West Virginia on Wednesday, and then the Zags will take on either the winner or the loser, depending how they do, of the Indiana-Louisville game in the Battle for Atlantis. After that, the ideal plan for Gonzaga, certainly, and for college basketball space, they want to see Gonzaga-Arizona in that championship game. That is everybody's hope. I don't know if it's what Mark Few and Tommy Lloyd want necessarily, but it is what everybody else wants to see in that game. But let's not get there yet. Let's start with this West Virginia team, the other potential Big 12 team for Gonzaga, the third Big 12 team they'll play this year. They got a new coach, Darian DeVries. He comes to Morgantown after a very successful stint at the mid-major level at Drake. He brings his son along with him, Tucker DeVries, who averaged about 21 points per game last year. One of the, I think it was like 6th or 7th in the country in points per game. He hasn't quite been that same level of scorer in the early going for the Mountaineers. They're 3-1 on the year. They got beat pretty bad by a pretty good Pitt team. Other than that, 3 victories against not very impressive opponents. Connor, what has been your early read on this West Virginia team? Again, it's only a few games, but kind of what have you thought about this team and Coach DeVries coming over to Morgantown?
It's rough. It's going to be a rough season for them all around. Javon Small has been good in every game. Mm-hmm. He was good against Pitt. I think he went 4 of 9 from 3. Yeah. He was really the only one. Tucker DeVries continues to be a player that's really good against mid-majors and really bad against high majors. Mm-hmm. And then Jonathan Powell can hit the 3 ball. Hansberry can rebound a little bit. But this is a team that doesn't really shoot the ball well. With the 3 ball, not what they shoot a lot of threes and they shoot it well. Mm-hmm. But like they're 286th in the country in offensive rebound percentage. So if they're missing their threes, they're not getting second and third chance opportunities. Defensively, they also don't rebound. It's just not a good rebounding team against a Gonzaga team that does rebound the ball particularly well. And I think that's going to be the story of this game, right? You have to have an otherworldly 3-point shooting performance from those 3 guys to down this Gonzaga team. And I just don't know if they have it in them.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I'm not super excited about this West Virginia team, like overall this season. I think Coach DeVries is a good coach. And I think, you give him a half decade or so there. And I think you'll definitely see some improvement, even in a very crowded Big 12 that added some more teams that might help West Virginia move up a little bit, because some of the new teams in the conference probably aren't going to be all that good. But I'm not sold on them yet, but I do think the fact that they have multiple guys shooting well over 40% from 3 again, 75% of their opponents have not been very good. So some of those numbers might be a little bit misleading. Any data point before December, or even before January, is probably a little bit misleading. That's just how it works. But this team can shoot it, but they can't rebound. They're not a great 2-point shooting team. They don't have a lot of low post scoring presence. And I think the lack of rebounding to me feels like it's going to be the biggest problem for them in this game. If they go out and shoot the absolute crap, they average about 29 3-point attempts per game. They make 15 of them, this is going to be a game. They make 9, probably not going to be a game because Gonzaga is going to gobble up 15 of those 20 defensive rebounds if they're not making their shots. Is there anything that you see as a potential hang up? Like, I think Gonzaga is fairly clearly the more talented team. They're the team with more continuity at this point. They're a team that doesn't really need to still be finding themselves the way that West Virginia is kind of still in that early stages. But is there something that you could see, maybe that'll make it a game, or maybe there is a chance that something happens that could really trip Gonzaga up in this first game?
They make scoring around the rim, or they have this season, pretty difficult. Even in that Pitt shot the ball well around the rim, but it came from the guards. It didn't really come from the front court. And I think that could be an issue. But I mean, when you're running EK and Huff and Greg and Ajayi at them, all plus Caliph Battle attacking from the perimeter, plus Nolan Hickman, shooting those baseline runners, plus whatever you get from Ryan Nembhard going through contact. I think it's just going to be too much, and it's going to overwhelm them. And I that's kind of just where I'm at. Like, they don't have anyone in particular that I think matches up poorly against Gonzaga, like that Gonzaga matches up poorly against. Size could be an issue in the backcourt because they do run some bigger guards and wings, but again, Gonzaga can kind of match that size throughout the game. So really the only hang up I could see is if you like Javon Small, to me, appears like one of those guards that in the past would kind of kill Gonzaga. And so you just have to figure out how to contain him. I think that's just kind of a matter of putting Caliph Battle on him. And you put Caliph Battle on him, you put Ajayi on Tucker DeVries, you figure out how you can get Nolan Hickman kind of against one of those bigger wings and have him be adequate defensively. You should win this game pretty easily.
Yeah, that's kind of what they have one guy who's above 6'8", who's in their rotation. It's Eduardo Andre, and he's a shot blocking machine. He's averaging 2.5 blocks in just 16 minutes a game, but he's the only guy at that size on this team. And we haven't seen Graham Ike be Graham Ike yet outside of the second half against San Diego State. But I think if he has a productive game here, there's little West Virginia can do to really hang with this team for a full 40. But I do want to look ahead to what would be the second game for Gonzaga. If they do beat West Virginia, they would play in the morning on Thanksgiving against whoever wins between Indiana and Louisville. And before we look at those matchups for Gonzaga, let's just talk about that matchup in particular. Obviously, Indiana is going to be favored in this game. They're the ranked team. Louisville is not in that conversation right now. They got waxed at home by Tennessee, which is a loss that is probably going to age well. It already kind of has, as Tennessee has looked very good in the early going this season. But Louisville, brand new roster. Every player is new. Pat Kelsey's new as the coach there, of course. And so they're just a team that hasn't really got their bearings yet. Whereas Indiana, a lot of new faces, but also some returners. Mike Whitson's been there for a while. Mackenzie Mgbako has looked really good in the early going. He stumbled a bit in his recent games, but was incredible to start the season. Again, we'll talk about what a matchup might look like. I have some concerns about how Gonzaga is going to defend Mgbako if they play Indiana, but is that who you envision Gonzaga likely matching up with, assuming they beat West Virginia?
Indiana Louisville is going to be one of those games where like the contrasting styles could just, it could go either way, right? You have a Louisville team that's only shooting 29% from three, but they take almost 55% of their shots from deep. That introduces a variance. That makes it very difficult to say definitively that Indiana, who doesn't really shoot, they shoot the ball better than they did last year, but they are still 344th. They shoot 30% of their shots from three. They're not looking to get into a high scoring bout. If Louisville can come out and hit let's say they hit 6 of their first 10 from deep. If I'm an Indiana fan, I'm starting to sweat because Indiana doesn't want to get in a shootout. Louisville shoots the ball really well from the interior. When they do shoot it there, they're 61% from two. they defend adequately enough, force enough turnovers that I think they can take advantage of like how loose and really low effort this Indiana team has looked through the first 4 games. There's a reason why Indiana's 4-0, crushing every team they've played, and is only 38th on KenPom. And it has a lot to do with the fact that they take plays off. And I think it's going to be contrasting coaches. Pat Kelsey is a fireball, maybe not quite to the level of the Hurley brothers, but like he can be animated on the sideline. And then you have Mike Woodson, who half the time I'm not even sure he like really wants to be there.
You don't look like it.
So that one, I think Indiana wins that game because they are more consistent. They have more talent. And they've shown in spurts that they can shoot the ball well on the shots they take. But I think if this is a blowout, like if this is a double-digit win, I think it's more likely that Louisville wins by double digits than Indiana.
Yeah, I like that. And I see some ways where Louisville can, they have one of the things that Pat Kelsey likes is he brought in bigs who can space the floor. Potentially they can pull Umar Ballo away from the rim a little bit. Like there are some things they could do effectively that I think could really work. I think defensively, I'm curious how they're going to defend Mgbako and how they're going to handle, again, they don't have a ton of beefy guys to stop Ballo down low, but we've also seen, Ballo be a player who doesn't dominate down on the block offensively, even against smaller opponents. And we've seen Mgbako go cold. And it's like, there's absolutely a path where Louisville wins this game and maybe even a path where they win it fairly handily. I think you're right to favor Indiana. I think that's what most people think, and I think there's a reason for that. But they are the more talented team. But it wouldn't stun me if Louisville pulls the upset here. But if Gonzaga's playing either of these teams, again, I think a lot of the same kind of analysis is going to be in effect there for Indiana. Umar Ballo up against Graham Ike, that's going to be a huge storyline in that game, not just because Ballo used to play at Gonzaga, of course, but that's a big part of it as well. How Gonzaga defends Mackenzie Mgbako, who they throw on him. Is it Michael Ajayi? Is it Caliph Battle trying to kind of deal with his size? Like, how do they kind of defend him? And then, of course, the main question is, if Gonzaga gets out to a big lead, is Indiana capable of coming back in that one? I think there's a lot of interesting storylines as to how that game could play out. But to me, I don't dislike this Indiana team, but I would favor Gonzaga. And honestly, I'd favor them fairly heavily. I just don't think this Indiana team has the horses to hang with Gonzaga for a full 40.
Yeah, I mean, if I told you that there was a team that started 2'6'9" kind of tweener forwards, a 7-foot center. They had a 6'7" freshman coming off the bench, a 6'7" shooter coming off the bench, and a 6'5" point guard who comes off the bench. And like you've got then Miles Rice and Cannon Carlisle, who I think play bigger than their 6'3", but they're also like 6'3" is not short. And then I told you that they were 151st in offensive rebound percentage and 198th in defensive rebound percentage. To me, Indiana, because they have the lower ceiling, because we've seen them take plays off, because like there was, I think even before he transferred from Gonzaga, like you could argue that Umar Ballo was just not in the plans for the future of this team, given the way he plays. He's a great player, but I just don't think he fit into the rotation of like the last couple of Gonzaga teams. They turn the ball over okay, but you're going up against a Gonzaga team that's top 15 in offensive turnover percentage. They don't shoot a ton of threes, so it's not like they're going to get into a huge shooting battle with you. You'd feel comfortable against that team. I think with Louisville, if I said there's a team we haven't seen their best basketball, they have a coach who knows how to kind of get players riled up. They have Terrence Edwards, who is a really good mid-major guard. They have Chucky Hepburn, who was a Big Ten point guard that transferred to Louisville. Keyshawn Pryor has been really good as kind of their big down low. Javon Hadley can shoot the heck out of the ball. Same with Rain Smith. Like, to me, that's scarier. Now, Indiana might have the higher percentage of, like, if you were to play 100 games between Gonzaga and Indiana, Indiana probably wins more than Louisville. But if there's one game, like if I have one game and I'm like, okay, I need one of these two teams to keep up with the number one offense in the country.
Yep.
I'm taking Louisville, because at least then I have the ceiling of, oh, they could theoretically put up 90 points against Gonzaga's defense.
Yeah. Teams that try to slow Gonzaga down and say, well, we're going to beat you by, we're not going to score 75 points or even 70 points, but we're going to make you not score as many. That rarely works. But teams that say, well, okay, you're going to score 90, but we're going to score 92, maybe that'll work. Like maybe Louisville could do that, and their team, they don't have a ton of interior defensive presence. And I think that would be a factor against Graham and Braden in particular. But this is a team that they score a lot of points. They have a lot of talent. It hasn't quite all come together yet, but we're a few weeks into a season where they replaced their entire roster. So of course it hasn't quite come together yet. I don't think Louisville will beat Indiana, but I think if they did, they would be a little bit more scary to me, just because I think that they're a bit more of a wild card. And I think Pat Kelsey's a very good coach and a very promising coach for them to have into that system. But I do still think there's enough warts on their roster and the way Gonzaga has been just humming along in the early going of this season, where I think the Zags advance either way. But yeah, I'm with you. I think a really hot Louisville team could be a problem in a way that I'm not sure Indiana would be.
And Louisville on initial possession, like the initial play and possessions is really good defensively. Where they start to lose you is second, third chance opportunities. But if they can hold Gonzaga to one and dones, like that worries me. Where Indiana, they have enough warts elsewhere defensively. That I think, if I were to, Gonzaga probably puts up 90 points on 85 points on either. But like Louisville, just to me is such a weird team right now that I would much rather play the team I know in Indiana than the team I really don't, especially a Louisville coming off a win over Indiana. So
we're going to move on. We're going to talk about the bottom half of the Atlantis bracket. And most importantly, we're going to talk about Arizona. Are they going to be the team that advances to the Atlantis championship game? They'll take on Davidson in the first game. And then we got Providence in Oklahoma. We're going to preview that game as well. All that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, get ready to tackle the college hoops action this season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. Right now at FanDuel, the Zags odds to win the battle for Atlantis are at +100. Arizona is next at +260, and that Indiana team we just talked about is third at +600. If you're feeling confident about the Zags, and we're going to tell you our picks here in just a second, then visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, segment 3. Still Andy Patton here, still joined by Connor Hope, and we're still previewing the battle for Atlantis as we are, depending when you're listening to this, about 24 hours out from Gonzaga's first game against West Virginia on Wednesday. We talked about the matchup with West Virginia. We talked about how Gonzaga matches up against either Indiana or Louisville. If we assume Gonzaga wins both those two games, they're going to a championship, where it is expected widely that they will face Tommy Lloyd, the 20-year assistant coach at Gonzaga under Mark Few, who is, of course, the head coach now at Arizona. Arizona opens up against Davidson, and then we'll take on either Providence or Oklahoma in the second game. We'll start with Davidson, 4-0 on the year. I haven't really played anybody of note. They haven't been great the last couple of years. I feel for Davidson. They had a legendary coach in Bob McKillop, who was there for 40 years, 30-something years, replaced him with his son. His son hasn't had as much success. Now they're in a weird spot of how much longer do we give the leash to Matt McKillop here in this situation. But Arizona, obviously a team that already has 2 losses on the year. Neither of them are bad losses. They lost to Wisconsin on the road. They lost to Duke at home. But it was odd to see them lose a game to Wisconsin where they gave up 103 points and lose a game to Duke where they only scored 55 points. I feel like there's a little bit of panic or concern for this Arizona team. I'm not concerned about them against Davidson. I'll just say that right now. I think they win this one, and I'd be very surprised if they did not. But I am a little bit more hesitant about Arizona and their ceiling this year, especially after those losses.
Yeah, I mean, they looked good. Not great, but good against Canisius and Old Dominion, which are teams you should look good against. They are a combined 2-12 this season, which makes like the going up against an 0-7 Canisius at home and winning by less than 30 now just doesn't look as good.
Right.
I wouldn't say their losses were bad. Wisconsin on the road, a top 5 Duke team at home, top 5 KenPom, not AP poll. The fact that they lost both of them by double digits and it never really felt like they had a shot in the second half, that's the concern. The fact that I think Caleb Love falls into that weird 5th-year senioritis group. John L. Davis, we saw have his first game, good game for Arkansas. Mark Sears has looked checked out for Alabama a little bit. Caleb Love has looked pretty bad. He's shooting 45% from 2, 20%, 21% from 3. I think he's only averaging like 10 points per game or something like that. They don't have, I mean, Kylan Boswell walking out the door allowed Jaden Bradley to explode, losing KJ Johnson and then losing Umar Ballo. Just hurts Kashad Johnson and Umar Ballo just hurts you defensively so much. And I never really got that. Like they were top 5 or top 6 in KenPom defense to start the year. They're now down to 23. I never got it because their interior presence is just, it's not good. Trey Townsend can give you something. I think offensively, he doesn't give you much defensively. Tobe Awaka is the complete opposite of that. He'll give you great defense and rebounding. He's a 0 offensively. Visar and Krivas are, they're okay. Krivas, I think, will eventually get there. They're, I think right now banking more on their size than they are necessarily on their ability to dominate like we thought they might against comparable competition. But they don't shoot the ball well. The guys you brought in who thought were going to shoot the ball well, and Anthony Del Orso is only 36% from deep. I mentioned Caleb Love. Jaden Bradley's 36. KJ Lewis is 27%. Like they're just not getting it done as jump shooters. Carter Bryant probably should be a bigger factor in this rotation as a freshman, but I don't necessarily disagree with him not being that because you kind of want or need some of these other more experienced players to step up. This team's just, it's looked out of sorts. And I think that's the kindest way to put it.
And what's interesting to me, and I don't want this to be some big, referendum on Tommy because it's too early for that. It's too early in this season and too early in Tommy's career, but a lot of players who had high expectations, I think of Krivas in particular as a guy who was like, he hasn't looked like that guy yet. He's not playing huge minutes. And like you said, he's relying on his size, but not really skill yet necessarily. And, Boswell was a guy who didn't play as well as expected at Arizona. And how many guys have left who didn't play, or didn't play enough or didn't play at the level people thought they would, like Adon Alpha-Ball and Paulus Morauskas, who are both now in the WCC. And it just feels like there's a lot of young talent coming through Arizona that's not quite reaching that potential. Obviously, it's way too early to be down on KJ Lewis or Carter Bryant. They're just a few games into their careers. They're a few games into the season in Lewis's case, but it does feel like we're not seeing guys quite reach where they're capable of being or where they're expected to be. And when you combine that with the fact that your veteran players aren't doing what they're supposed to do. Toby Walk is doing what he's supposed to do, but what he's supposed to do is not score the basketball, and he's he's not offering anything there, and he's replacing a guy in Keshad Johnson who is good on both ends of the floor. And Del Orso is supposed to be a 3-point shooter who hasn't really been that guy. Like, I'm worried about this team because the pieces don't seem to be coming together. But again, it is early. They have played two very good teams. I think Davidson is a team they should just be able to out talent and get past. But I think they'll beat either Providence or Oklahoma. I'm not like overly concerned about it, mostly because I don't think either of those teams are very good. And it's more about that. Like, if they were on the side of the bracket that Gonzaga is, Gonzaga cruises past Davidson, Providence, or Oklahoma, but I would be more concerned about Arizona against Indiana or Arizona against Louisville. Does that feel like a fair read to you? Or am I too low on Providence and Oklahoma, or kind of, what do you think about that?
No, I think that's a fair read. I mean, if you were to rank the teams in this tournament, you'd probably rank Gonzaga 1.
Mm-hmm.
You probably at this point still rank Arizona 2.
It's close.
Louisville, Indiana 3 and 4, and then Providence and Oklahoma would be in that 5-6 range. Davidson 7, West Virginia 8, or Davidson 8, West Virginia 7. However you want to rank those two. It's just there's a lack of discipline, I think, on this Arizona team. And in the past, I would say, look, if you're gonna get after Gonzaga, get at them physically. If you foul, you're sending poor free throw shooters to the line. That's not this season. Like, if you're fouling Caleb Battle, who's shooting extremely well from the free throw line. You're fouling Graham Ike, who's up to 75%. You're fouling Braden Huff, who's at 86%. Caleb Battle, when I said he was shooting really well, I forgot he hasn't missed one. I thought he had missed
I think he's at 100 still.
Yeah, he's at 18 out of 18. Ryan Nemhard has drawn quite a few fouls finally. At 86% from the line. Nolan Hickman's still perfect. Dusty Stromer 6 of 7. Ben Gregg's 8 of 12, which is like, I think Michael Ajayi's the worst, but he's not really getting to the line because he either has like wide open layups or dunks, or he's shooting jumpers. All that to say is that you can't play undisciplined, physical, foul happy basketball against this Gonzaga team. And I think that's what Arizona has been playing this year. That's how they did against Duke. That's how they did, especially against Wisconsin. Man, the amount of fouls in that game was ridiculous. They were letting things, I think, go a little bit more in that Duke Arizona game, so no one went to the line quite as much. It was just super physical. But like last year, I would have said the best player on the floor is Caleb Love. And then Gonzaga has the next 3 to 4. This year, with the way they've been playing, Caleb Love is 5th or 6th, depending on where you want to put Jaden Bradley. And so I just think, I mean, unless something happens in the first 2 games of this tournament where Arizona's looking otherworldly again, they have the path to the championship that everyone said UConn did in the Maui Invitational. But B, if they struggle through 2 wins, like, I would not want to face Gonzaga or Indiana on the other side of that championship game.
I'm with you there. If Arizona struggles against Davidson and either Providence or Oklahoma, it's going to be hard to feel confident that they're going to turn it around and bring it against a Gonzaga team that has, outside of some struggles against Arizona State, this team has looked pretty darn good all season long. And I think the foul issues, the discipline issues defensively for Arizona is not going to play well at all against Gonzaga. Caleb Battle's going to score. He's going to do what John Tonje did. He's going to score 20 points from the free throw line. And that's just, it's just not going to play for this team. So I kind of got a sense I got your prediction here. I'll give mine, but I got Gonzaga over Arizona. I think it's what people want. I think Arizona does do enough to get by Davidson, to get by. I'm thinking it'll be Oklahoma because I'm really down on Providence and the way they've looked early. But either way, I think Arizona wins that game. And I think Gonzaga, I don't think this Arizona team is playing well enough right now. I think it's possible in February if this team kind of gets better, that maybe this matchup's a little closer. And Caleb Love, I mean, he's the kind of player who so far this year, he's mostly shot Arizona out of games, but he can shoot you into a game. He's done it before. He will do it again at some point this year. And it would be unfortunate for Gonzaga fans if he were to finally find that in that championship game. But he has not looked like that guy up to this point. And if he's not going to be that guy, not only is Arizona not going to beat Gonzaga, they might have some real trouble finishing even in the top 5 in the Big 12, maybe even top 6 or 7, depending on how confident you feel about Cincy or Texas Tech or BYU and some of those other teams in that conference. It'll be interesting to see if Tommy and Arizona can kind of right the ship. But I got Gonzaga over Arizona for my prediction in the battle for Atlantis.
Give me Gonzaga over Oklahoma.
Ooh, I like it. I like it.
Oklahoma's been playing really good defense.
Yeah.
They've been shooting the heck out of the ball. They force a ton of turnovers. Mm-hmm. They don't turn the ball over. You get into a free throw game with them, they shoot 76% from the line. They looked better defensively in their games again. And granted, they haven't played anyone, whereas Arizona has played 2 tough teams. But if they get by a Providence team, I think they should get by. I think Porter Moser has this team in a good position to be in position. And man, there's a lot to clean up for Arizona that I just don't feel the same way about for Oklahoma, because a lot of Oklahoma's issues are issues that they can't really fix. You're going to need a big Visar, Krivas, Owaka game against Oklahoma to beat them. And I just think this Arizona team is right now not in a position to win big games.
Oklahoma's got the right set of skills. Like you said, they're a good free throw shooting team. They're a good defensive team. They got some size. Like I could see it. It's hard to know a lot about this team because they have the best team they've played, according to Ken Pom, is Northwestern State, who's 272nd. So they've blown every team that they've played out, which is what you want to see from a team playing a bunch of cupcakes. But we just don't really know. And if they go out and blast Providence, which wouldn't surprise me if they win the game against Providence by 15 or 20, then I could absolutely feel like, oh, okay, this is a better team than we've seen so far. We haven't really gotten any chance to prove themselves yet. And so, I could definitely see Oklahoma doing that. Porter Moser's team, I mean, did they lose at all in the non-conference last year? They maybe only lost 1. They went into conference play like rolling, and then they didn't do nearly as well in conference play and missed the tournament. But this Porter Moser's got Oklahoma winning a lot of games in the non-conference. Maybe they'll do it again.
And I'll do you one better, Andy. Give me Indiana over Arizona in this 3rd place game.
Ooh.
Arizona, I think, leaves this tournament 1-2 with their only win being Davidson.
So we'll go Gonzaga, Oklahoma, Indiana, Arizona, and then I guess it would be what?
Who cares Louisville? At the bottom? I think it's probably going to be Louisville over Providence and Davidson over West Virginia.
At that point, All right, let's see how you do. I'm excited. I could absolutely see those things happening, and at that point, there's going to be some real concern going on in Tucson for that team. We'll see if that helps them kind of right the ship after that. But Connor, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I really appreciate it. Always fun to have your insight and kind of expertise looking at these games. It's going to be a lot of fun, folks. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate all of you out there. We got one more show before the games get into action on Wednesday, and then of course we'll have shows going on right after the West Virginia game, after the second game, after the game on Friday as well, getting into next week, the start of December, and the last few epic games for Gonzaga in the non-conference against Kentucky, UConn, and UCLA. Thanks again, folks, for listening. And until next time, as always, go Zags.